Can you imagine it? A gaunt, starving mother tightly clutching her 6-year-old son, whose face is turning blue from a severe asthma attack, right in the middle of a freezing October downpour that feels like the sky is tearing itself apart. No money, no medicine, no one to help. She collapses to her knees in a muddy puddle, convinced this is the end for both of them. But at the moment of deepest despair, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade pulls up. The door opens, and out steps the most powerful man in the city, the notorious Mafia boss, Anthony Russo, a name that alone makes all of Las Vegas tremble in fear. He sees her, and in that single instant, fate changes forever. Could a cold-blooded crime lord ever fall so deeply in love with a destitute woman that he'd risk his entire empire for her? Is love strong enough to save them from bullets, betrayals, and enemies who never forgive? Stay with me, because the story I'm about to tell will melt your heart and send chills down your spine. Before we dive into this chilling and mysterious story, please remember to subscribe to the channel Alex Truths and like this video. Every subscription, like, and share from you is a huge spiritual gift and an incredibly profound source of motivation for the channel's growth, so we can continue bringing wonderful videos every day to everyone. There would be no greater joy than receiving your love and support through the comments you leave right below this video. Comments sharing your emotions, or telling us which province or city you're living and working in while listening to this story. All right. Let's continue together and immerse ourselves in this amazing, captivating story that's filled with deep emotions. The rain came down in relentless sheets that December night in Las Vegas, turning the streets of the Naked City neighborhood, those forgotten blocks just north of the glittering Strip, into rivers of muddy water. It was late, past midnight, on a cold evening in October 2025, and Sarah Jennings trudged along East Twain Avenue, her thin coat soaked through, clinging to her malnourished frame like a second skin. At 28, she looked older, her face gaunt from too many skipped meals, her dark hair plastered to her forehead, eyes hollow from endless nights of worry and exhaustion. In her arms, she carried her 6-year-old son, Ethan, his small body racked with wheezing coughs that cut through the storm like knives. His asthma attack had started hours earlier in their tiny, drafty apartment on a side street off Owens Avenue, one of those rundown complexes where the heat barely worked and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument from the neighbors. Sarah had used the last of their inhaler that morning, and now, with no money for a refill and the corner pharmacy closed, she had no choice but to bundle him up and head out into the night, praying the emergency room at Sunrise Children's Hospital would take them without demanding payment up front. Her sneakers, worn through at the soles from double shifts waiting tables at a dingy diner off Boulder Highway, splashed through puddles that soaked her ankles. Ethan was heavy in her arms, his little face pale and flushed at the same time, his breathing shallow and terrifying. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice soft and timid, trembling with fear. "Mommy's got you. We're almost there." But they weren't. The bus had never come, and walking the miles in this downpour felt impossible. Her legs burned, her arms ached, and a wave of dizziness hit her, numbness spreading from the cold, from hunger, from the sheer unfairness of it all. Why did everything always go wrong? The eviction notice taped to their door last week, the power shut off twice this month, the judgmental looks from caseworkers who acted like she wasn't trying hard enough. She stumbled, nearly dropping Ethan as her knee buckled on the slick sidewalk. They collapsed against a chain-link fence near a dimly lit, vacant lot, Sarah's back sliding down until she sat in a puddle, cradling her son as he gasped for air. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. No one stopped. Cars sped by on Las Vegas Boulevard in the distance, headlights blurring through the storm, drivers hurrying to the warm lights of casinos or home to families who didn't know this kind of desperation. Sarah felt invisible, powerless. A single mother scraping by on tips, her body thin from giving Ethan the last bites of food, her sleep stolen by nightmares of losing him. Across the city, in a private back room of a high-end Italian restaurant on the Strip, Tony Russo finished a tense meeting. At 48, Tony was the head of one of Las Vegas's most powerful families, a fair-skinned Italian-American whose sharp features and piercing blue eyes commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's rent, he drove his black Cadillac Escalade through the rain-slicked streets, his driver handling the wheel while Tony stared out the window, his mind heavy. The meeting had been rough, a confrontation with rivals from a California crew pushing into his territory over construction contracts. Words had been exchanged, threats veiled but clear, and Tony had stared them down, his voice calm but laced with steel. As they left, one of the rivals' cars had tailed him briefly, a bold move that forced a quick, tense standoff at a red light on Flamingo Road, headlights glaring, engines revving, hands hovering near concealed weapons until the light changed and they peeled away. Tony's heart had pounded then, not from fear, but from the gnawing guilt that always followed these encounters. How many more years could he live like this? The power, the wealth, it came at a cost, and the remorse ate at him like acid, especially since losing his wife 10 years ago. He had built an empire, but at what price to his soul? His driver turned onto a quieter street to avoid traffic, cutting through the older parts of town near East Twain. That's when Tony saw her, a young woman slumped on the sidewalk, a child in her arms, both drenched and shivering violently. Something twisted in his chest, sharp and immediate. "Stop the car," he ordered, his voice low but urgent. The Escalade pulled over. Tony grabbed a large golf umbrella from the back, black, expensive, monogrammed, and stepped out into the rain. His Italian leather shoes splashed through puddles as he approached, the wind whipping his coat. The woman looked up, her eyes wide with fear and confusion, body tensing as if ready to run despite her exhaustion. "Ma'am," Tony said gently, crouching down to her level, holding the umbrella over her and the boy. His voice was deep, reassuring, but inside, turmoil raged. Who leaves a mother and child like this? The world was cruel, unjust, and he, of all people, knew he contributed to that cruelty in his line of work. Guilt flooded him, hot and consuming. "Your little one, he's having trouble breathing?" Sarah stared at the stranger, this tall, impeccably dressed man with kind but intense eyes. Fear gripped her. In her neighborhood, strangers in fancy cars didn't stop to help. But Ethan's wheezes grew worse, and dizziness swamped her again. "Yes, sir," she whispered timidly, politely, her voice soft from years of deferring to customers, to landlords, to anyone with power. "Asthma. We need the hospital. Please." Tony's heart cracked. The boy's lips were turning blue. Without hesitation, he scooped Ethan gently into his strong arms, the child light as a feather, too light, and helped Sarah to her feet. Her legs wobbled, numbness shooting through her, but his grip was steady, warm. "My car," he said firmly. "Sunrise Children's Hospital. Now." As they hurried to the Escalade, another car, a dark sedan, slowed nearby, headlights cutting through the rain. Tony recognized it instantly, one of the California rivals, testing him again. His jaw tightened, inner conflict violent, remorse for the life that brought enemies to his door, fear that this act of decency could endanger them. He shielded Sarah and Ethan with his body, staring down the sedan until it sped away. Inside the warm, leather-scented luxury of the SUV, Sarah sat in the back with Ethan on her lap, shock and disorientation washing over her. The seats were heated, the air fragrant with new car smell, worlds away from her leaking apartment with its secondhand couch and empty fridge. She felt small, humiliated by her soaked clothes dripping on the pristine interior, her thin frame shivering despite the warmth. Who was this man? Why was he helping? Tony sat up front but turned back often, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview mirror. Something stirred in him, an overwhelming surge, fierce and passionate, from the moment he saw her vulnerable strength, her quiet protectiveness. Love? No, too soon, but a pull, deep and consuming, mixed with remorse for his own hardened life. "We'll be there soon," he said softly. "He'll be okay." At the hospital, Tony carried Ethan inside, barking orders calmly as nurses rushed them to the pediatric emergency room. He paid anonymously in cash for everything: treatment, new inhalers, even warm blankets and food for Sarah. She watched in dazed confusion, tears streaming as Ethan's breathing eased under the nebulizer. Hours later, as dawn hinted through the storm clouds, Tony drove them home to her modest apartment off Owens. Sarah's heart pounded with curiosity, fear, gratitude, a confusing torrent. "Thank you, sir," she whispered at the door, voice timid. I don't know how to repay you." Tony looked at her, rain still dripping from his hair, his expensive suit ruined but uncared for. Inner turmoil tore at him, guilt for his world of power that contrasted her poverty so starkly, remorse for lives he'd impacted, and now this fierce, unexpected protectiveness blooming into something deeper. He handed her his card. "If you ever need anything, call," his voice rough with emotion he barely understood. As he drove away, Rival's threats lingered in his mind, but so did her face, pitiful, resilient, beautiful in its quiet suffering. And in that moment, something shifted irrevocably in Tony Russo's guarded heart. The days after that rainy October night in 2025 blurred into a haze of exhaustion and quiet disbelief for Sarah Jennings. Back in their cramped one-bedroom apartment off Owens Avenue, the walls seemed thinner than ever, the wind whistling through cracks around the old windows like a constant reminder of how little stood between her and the cold world outside. Ethan was better, his breathing steady thanks to the new inhalers that had mysteriously appeared at the pharmacy, with a note saying, "Paid in full." But Sarah could not shake the numbness that had settled in her bones. She was 28, but felt 50. Her body was thin, almost fragile, ribs faintly visible beneath the faded t-shirt she wore to bed because she could not afford new pajamas. Meals were still skipped. Ethan always ate first. The last box of macaroni stretched over 3 days, the peanut butter jar scraped clean with a knife. Sleep came in fits, interrupted by the baby's cough, or the neighbors shouting, or the gnawing fear that tomorrow the landlord would finally make good on his eviction threat. The power bill lay unopened on the counter, red-stamped, "Final Notice," and the diner had cut her shifts again because business was slow. Every morning she woke with a dull ache behind her eyes, a dizziness that made the room tilt when she stood too fast. Yet, amid the crushing weight of it all, one thing kept circling in her mind: the stranger in the expensive suit who had appeared out of the storm like something from a dream she did not deserve. Tony Russo. She had whispered his name aloud once, testing it on her tongue, then felt foolish. Men like him did not rescue women like her. There had to be a catch, a debt she could never repay, a reason that would one day come crashing down and make everything worse. Fear and curiosity warred inside her, leaving her guarded, quiet, afraid to hope. Across the city, in a sprawling penthouse atop a private tower on the Strip, Tony Russo stood at floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the neon glow of Las Vegas Boulevard. The view was breathtaking, millions of lights twinkling like captured stars, but tonight it felt hollow. He had not slept well since that night. The woman's face haunted him, pale, rain-streaked, fierce in her protectiveness despite her frailty. And the boy, so small, so trusting in his arms. Tony's chest tightened with a pain he could not name. He had ordered his consigliere, Marco, to look into her quietly. No contact, no pressure, just answers. Marco returned 2 days later with a thick folder and a look Tony knew too well. They met in the private study. Mahogany walls lined with books Tony rarely read anymore. A crystal decanter of aged bourbon untouched on the desk. Her name is Sarah Jennings, Marco began carefully. 28, single mother, works at the Sunrise Diner off Boulder Highway. Tips barely cover rent. Eviction pending. No family. Mother died when she was 19, father unknown, listed as blank on the birth certificate. Tony's hand tightened around the glass he had finally poured. And the boy? Ethan, 6, severe asthma, medical bills stacked high. She's been fighting alone a long time. Marco hesitated, then slid a DNA report across the desk. Tony stared at it for a long moment before opening it. The numbers and graphs blurred at first, then resolved into cold, undeniable truth. Sarah Jennings was the biological daughter of Vincent Moretti, Tony's mentor, the man who had raised him in the life, taught him everything, and died 15 years ago without ever acknowledging the affair that produced a child. The room seemed to tilt. Tony stood abruptly, walking back to the window, his reflection pale against the glass. Vincent had never spoken of her, never provided for her, and Tony, loyal to a fault, had sworn to protect Vincent's blood with his own life. Yet here was Vincent's daughter, starving in a run-down apartment while Tony lived in luxury, built partly on the empire Vincent had left him. Guilt crashed over him like a wave, violent and suffocating. Remorse clawed at his throat. How many years had she suffered while he dined in private rooms, drove cars that cost more than her lifetime earnings, wore watches worth her annual salary on his wrist? The injustice of it burned. His hands shook as he gripped the window frame. He had everything: power, money, respect born of fear, and she had nothing. Worse than nothing: humiliation, cold nights, hunger. But beneath the remorse, something else stirred, fiercer, hotter, more dangerous. From the first moment he had seen her in the rain, cradling her son with a strength that belied her frailty, something had cracked open inside him. Not pity, not duty, desire, love. The word terrified him. He was 48, widowed a decade, his heart long armored against softness. Yet Sarah Jennings, thin, exhausted, beautiful in her quiet endurance, had slipped past every defense in a single rain-soaked night. He hated himself for it. She was Vincent's daughter. She was vulnerable. And he was a man whose world destroyed gentleness. The inner conflict was brutal. The need to protect her, warring with the fear that his protection would only bring her more pain. Rivals already circled, sensing weakness in his recent restraint. That night in the rain, the California crew had tailed him again. Another bold stare-down at a deserted intersection near Sahara Avenue. Engines growling, windows cracked just enough to show silhouettes of hands on weapons. They had backed off when Tony's men emerged from a following SUV, but the message was clear. Any sign of softness would be exploited. Tony turned from the window, his jaw tight. "She gets help," he said quietly. "Groceries, medical refills, rent paid anonymously. Nothing that scares her, nothing that ties it to me." Marco nodded, but his eyes held concern. "Boss, you sure you want to get this close? Vincent never claimed her. You don't owe—" "I owe," Tony cut in, voice rough with emotion. "Vincent saved my life, and I swore blood protects blood." He did not add the rest, that it was no longer just duty, that every time he closed his eyes he saw her face, heard her timid, "Thank you, sir," felt the overwhelming surge to pull her into his arms and shield her from every cruelty the world had heaped upon her. Over the next week, quiet miracles began appearing in Sarah's life. A full bag of groceries left outside her door. Fresh fruit, milk, chicken, things she had not tasted in months. The pharmacy calling to say her inhaler refills were covered for a year. The landlord suddenly tearing up the eviction notice with a shrug and a vague, "Somebody paid up your back rent." Each gift left her more confused, more frightened. Who was doing this? Why? One evening, after another grueling shift, she returned to find Ethan asleep on the couch, his breathing even, a new blanket tucked around him. One soft and warm, not the threadbare one she had washed 100 times. Sarah sank to the floor beside him, dizziness washing over her again, tears burning hot trails down her cheeks. The kindness was unbearable because it highlighted how pitiful her life had become. She was 28 and could not keep her child warm. The shame of it choked her. Across town, Tony watched security footage Marco had discreetly obtained. Nothing invasive, just the building's exterior camera showing the grocery delivery. Seeing her thin frame struggle with the bags, seeing her pause and look around in bewildered gratitude, nearly undid him. He turned away from the screen, pressing a fist to his mouth. The love was already there, passionate, consuming, impossible. And the remorse was a living thing, gnawing deeper with every anonymous gift. Another confrontation came 2 nights later. Driving home from a meeting, Tony's Escalade was boxed in at a stoplight near Desert Inn Road by 2 SUVs from the same California rivals. Windows lowered just enough for shouted challenges. "Getting soft, Russo? Helping strays now?" Before Tony's men pulled up behind, forcing a standoff. No shots fired, just tense minutes of glaring across rain-slick asphalt until lights changed and they scattered. But the message lingered. His enemies smelled vulnerability. Tony drove the rest of the way with white knuckles on the wheel. He could not drag her into this world. Yet he could not walk away. The hidden blood tie bound him by honor. The surging love bound him by something deeper, more dangerous. And Sarah, poor resilient Sarah, remained unaware that the man whose heart now tore itself apart over her was the one person who could either save her completely or destroy her utterly. In the quiet of his penthouse that night, Tony stood again at the window, the city glittering below like a cruel promise. His reflection stared back, powerful, wealthy, alone. And for the first time in years, he whispered a prayer he had long abandoned, that somehow, against every odd, he could protect her without breaking her, that the love burning in his chest would not become the final injustice in her already unjust life. A week had crawled by since the rainy night, and the October chill of 2025 had deepened in Las Vegas, seeping through every crack in Sarah Jennings' apartment like an unwelcome guest. The groceries that kept appearing, bags of apples, cartons of milk, real chicken breasts, were now stacked in the tiny kitchen, but Sarah touched them with trembling fingers, as if they might vanish. Each gift felt like a debt she could never repay, a kindness too large for her small, broken life. She had not slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. Her body, already thin and malnourished, seemed to shrink further under the weight of suspicion and gratitude. At night, she sat on the sagging couch, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the business card Tony Russo had pressed into her hand. Plain white stock, heavy, expensive. His name in raised black letters, a single private phone number beneath. She had not called. How could she? Women like her did not call men like him. The diner shifts had grown crueler. The manager, a sour man who smelled of stale cigarettes, had cut her hours again, claiming slow business. Tips dwindled to coins and crumpled singles. One afternoon, after a customer complained that his coffee was cold and refused to pay, the manager docked her $20 from her wages. Sarah stood in the back alley during her 5-minute break, rain misting her face, dizziness sweeping through her so fiercely she had to lean against the dumpster to keep from falling. The unfairness of it clawed at her throat. She had refilled that coffee 3 times. She had smiled through his complaints, and still, $20, enough for Ethan's school lunch money, was gone. That same evening, as she walked home along Boulder Highway, head down against the wind, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled alongside her at the curb. The tinted window lowered smoothly, revealing Tony Russo. He looked exactly as she remembered. Immaculate dark suit, white shirt crisp against his fair skin, eyes the color of winter steel. But there was something new in his expression, something raw, almost haunted. "Miss Jennings," he said, voice low and careful. "May I give you a ride?" Sarah froze, heart hammering. Fear and curiosity collided, leaving her breathless. She glanced around. No one on the street paid attention. Her legs felt suddenly numb. I'm almost home, sir," she whispered, polite and timid, the words automatic after years of serving strangers who held power over her tips, her rent, her dignity. Tony stepped out of the vehicle, umbrella in hand, though the rain had eased to a drizzle. He held it over her without asking. Up close, the contrast struck her like a physical blow. His Italian leather shoes gleaming, his coat cashmere, the subtle scent of expensive cologne, while her own coat was threadbare at the elbows, her hair limp from days without proper shampoo, her frame so slight the wind threatened to push her over. "I'd feel better knowing you got home safe," he said. There was no command in it, only a quiet insistence that made refusal feel impossible. She nodded, too exhausted to argue, and slid into the back seat. The interior was warm, leather soft as butter, heated seats easing the ache in her bones. Ethan was with a neighbor for an hour. She had time. The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. Tony did not sit in the back with her. He remained up front beside the driver. But he turned to watch her, eyes never leaving her face. They did not drive straight home. At Tony's quiet instruction, the Escalade turned toward the Strip, gliding past glittering casinos and towering fountains. Sarah's breath caught. She had not been this close to the lights in years. Shame burned in her chest. She felt like an intruder in this world of wealth. He took her to a quiet coffee shop inside one of the grand hotels, a place with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and baristas who wore crisp aprons. Tony guided her to a corner booth away from prying eyes. When the server approached, he ordered for both of them without looking at the menu. Hot chocolate with extra whipped cream for her, black coffee for himself. Sarah's hands shook as she wrapped them around the warm mug when it arrived. Real cocoa, rich and creamy. She had not tasted anything like it since childhood. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sarah stared into the swirl of cream, afraid to meet his gaze. The silence pressed against her chest until she thought she might break. "Why are you doing this?" she finally whispered, voice soft, almost lost in the low hum of the cafe. "The hospital, the groceries, the rent. I don't understand." Tony's jaw tightened. Across from her, he looked suddenly older, lines of torment etched around his eyes. Inside, his heart was being torn in two directions at once. Duty to Vincent's hidden blood, and something far more dangerous, the burning, overwhelming love that had seized him from the first moment he saw her fragile strength in the rain. Every time he looked at her thin wrists, her hollow cheeks, the remorse became a living blade. He had palaces while she starved. He had armies while she fought alone, and still the desire to protect her, to pull her close and never let the world touch her again, grew more violent with each breath. "I keep my promises," he said at last, voice rough, "and I made one to someone important a long time ago, to look after family." Sarah's brow furrowed in confusion. "But I'm not—" "You are," he interrupted gently, then, softer, "You're Vincent Moretti's daughter." The words struck her like a physical blow. The mug slipped in her numb fingers, hot chocolate spilling across the table. Dizziness crashed over her. The opulent room tilted. Vincent Moretti, the name her mother had whispered only once, in anger and tears, before dying. A man who had never acknowledged Sarah, never sent $1, never cared. And now this stranger, this powerful, terrifyingly wealthy man, was claiming she was his family? Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Horror, shock, confusion, everything collided. "No," she whispered. "That can't— My mother said he didn't want me. He never... Tony reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, but not quite touching. The restraint cost him. He wanted to gather her into his arms, to shield her from every pain. Instead, he curled his fingers into a fist. "He was wrong," Tony said, voice thick with emotion. "And I was wrong for not finding you sooner." Outside the cafe windows, trouble stirred. 2 dark sedans pulled up across the street. California plates, tinted windows. Tony's driver noticed first, murmuring into an earpiece. Tony's expression hardened, but he did not move. Minutes later, as he escorted Sarah back to the Escalade, the sedans followed at a distance. At a red light near Flamingo Road, one pulled alongside. Windows cracked just enough for a shouted taunt. "Helping charity cases now, Russo? Careful, soft hearts bleed easy." Tony's hand tightened protectively on Sarah's elbow, guiding her quickly into the vehicle. His men materialized from a trailing SUV, forming a silent wall. Engines revved, stairs locked across the intersection. No weapons drawn, just raw tension thick enough to choke on, until the light changed and the rivals peeled away. Sarah's heart pounded. She had glimpsed the edge of a world she did not understand. Back in the quiet booth of her life, the offer came. Tony faced her fully, his blue eyes intense with everything he could not yet say. "I run a family foundation, legitimate, clean. Community work, clinics, food programs, help for mothers and kids like you and Ethan." His voice dropped. "I want you to run it for me. Full salary, $160,000 a year, benefits, health coverage for Ethan, and $50,000 cash up front to clear every debt, every worry." Sarah stared, the numbers meaningless at first. When they sank in, her breath left her. Shock numbed her limbs. The room spun again. No one earned that much. Not waitresses, not forgotten daughters. Tears spilled over. "Why?" she whispered again, voice breaking. "I'm nobody. I can't..." "You're everything," Tony said before he could stop himself. The words hung between them, raw and too honest. He saw the moment they registered, saw confusion flicker into something warmer, more dangerous. Inside his chest, the conflict raged harder than any street standoff. Love, fierce, passionate, impossible, burned hotter with every tear on her cheek. But he was poison to gentleness. His world brought rivals to traffic lights, threats to quiet evenings. How could he offer her salvation when his very name was danger? Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. The offer was a lifeline thrown into the abyss of her poverty, but it terrified her. To step from cold nights and empty cupboards into this man's orbit, to be seen, protected, perhaps even cherished by someone so powerful, felt like stepping off a cliff. Suspicion warred with desperate hope. Yet beneath both, something new stirred, a quiet, fluttering awareness of his gaze, the way his voice softened only for her. I need to think," she managed, voice barely audible. Tony nodded, though every instinct screamed to refuse her time, to bundle her and Ethan into safety now. "Take all the time you need." He slid a new card across the table, this one with the foundation's address. "But know this, Sarah. From the night I found you in the rain, I swore no one would hurt you again. Not hunger, not cold, not the world." As the Escalade finally drove her home through the glittering, indifferent city, Sarah pressed her face to the warm window, tears silent on her cheeks. The gap between their worlds had never felt wider or more unbearably close. And in the front seat, Tony stared straight ahead, heart tearing itself apart between remorse for her suffering and the burning, irresistible need to make her his, whatever the cost. October 2025 drew to a close in Las Vegas with a dry, biting wind that rattled the loose windows of Sarah Jennings' apartment like fingers demanding entry. She had accepted Tony Russo's offer 3 days earlier, signing the contract with a hand that would not stop shaking. $160,000 a year, health insurance, a signing bonus large enough to erase every overdue bill and still leave money in an account for the first time in her adult life. It felt like a dream she was terrified to wake from. The Moretti Family Foundation occupied the entire 20th floor of a sleek glass tower on Paradise Road, far from the neon chaos of the Strip, yet close enough that the lights bled into the night sky. Sarah's first day began with a security badge, a corner office with a view of the mountains, and a wardrobe of professional clothes delivered anonymously the night before. Simple blouses, tailored slacks, a warm coat that fit perfectly. She stood in front of her cracked bedroom mirror that morning, touching the soft fabric as if it might dissolve. Ethan, watching from the doorway with wide eyes, whispered, "Mommy, you look like a princess." The words broke something inside her. She knelt and hugged him until the tears stopped threatening. At the foundation, Sarah threw herself into the work with a hunger born of years spent powerless. She mapped the poorest neighborhoods, West Las Vegas, Naked City, Sunrise Manor, and planned mobile clinics, food distributions, after-school programs. Her ideas were bold, practical, rooted in the bone-deep knowledge of what it felt like to choose between medicine and groceries. Staff members, most of them polished professionals who had never missed a meal, listened at first with polite skepticism, then with growing respect as results poured in. Within 2 weeks, the first free pediatric asthma clinic opened in a converted storefront off Owens Avenue, only blocks from her old apartment. Mothers lined up at dawn, children in tow, eyes reflecting the same exhausted gratitude Sarah once felt. Tony visited often, officially for updates, unofficially because he could not stay away. Each time the private elevator doors opened and he stepped onto the 20th floor, the air seemed to change. Staff straightened unconsciously, conversations hushed. He wore tailored suits the color of midnight or charcoal, cufflinks glinting like quiet warnings, and he moved with the controlled grace of a man who owned every room he entered. Yet when his eyes found Sarah, working at her desk, sleeves rolled up, hair escaping its ponytail, something softened in his face that no one else ever saw. They began meeting late, after others had gone home. Strategy sessions, he called them. In truth, they were hours spent poring over maps and budgets, voices low in the empty office, city lights sprawling below like scattered jewels. Tony listened to her plans with an intensity that made her faltering words grow steady. When she spoke of children who could not afford inhalers, her voice cracked. When she described mothers skipping meals, her thin hands clenched. Each story tore at him anew, remorse for the empire he had built while she suffered. Guilt that his mentor's blood had gone unprotected for 28 years. But beneath duty, the forbidden fire grew. One evening, after approving funds for a new women's shelter, Sarah looked up to find Tony watching her across the conference table. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of her laptop and the city beyond the windows. Silence stretched, heavy and electric. "You're changing everything," he said quietly. "In 2 weeks, you've done more real good than this foundation has in years." Color rose in her cheeks. I know what it's like to need help and not have it." His jaw tightened. He stood, walking to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Inside, conflict raged more violently than any rival confrontation. Love, raw, consuming, impossible, burned hotter every day. He wanted to cross the room, pull her against him, promise her the world on a platter. But he was 48, powerful, dangerous. She was 28, fragile from years of hardship, and God help him, Vincent's daughter. The blood tie that bound him by honor now felt like a chain holding him back from the only softness he had craved in a decade. Sarah rose, hesitant, and joined him at the window. The height made her dizzy for a moment. She gripped the sill. Below, traffic crawled like glowing ants. "It's beautiful from up here," she whispered. "I used to walk past buildings like this and never imagine I'd be inside one." Tony turned to her. They stood close, too close. He could see the faint shadows under her eyes, the way exhaustion still lingered despite better meals, the quiet strength that had drawn him from the first rain-soaked night. His hand lifted, almost of its own accord, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, but both of them froze. "I'm sorry," he said roughly, stepping back. "I shouldn't—" "No," she said quickly, voice soft, timid. Then, braver, "It's okay." Their eyes locked. In that moment, something wordless passed between them. Recognition of the pull, the danger, the impossibility. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she felt faint. No one had ever looked at her the way Tony did, as if she were precious, breakable, and worth protecting at any cost. Confusion and longing tangled until she could barely breathe. Outside, trouble brewed again. As Tony's driver took him home later that night, 2 dark SUVs appeared in the rearview mirror near Spring Valley. They shadowed him for miles, pulling alongside at a deserted intersection on Decatur Boulevard. Windows lowered just enough for shouted challenges. "Playing philanthropist now, Russo? How long before the feds notice?" Tony's men emerged from a second vehicle, forming a silent line. Engines revved, stairs locked across the asphalt. The standoff lasted minutes, tension thick enough to cut, until the rivals sped away with a final mocking salute. Tony sat stone-faced in the back seat, knuckles white. Every act of kindness toward Sarah drew attention, made him appear weak. Rivals circled closer, testing. Yet the thought of pulling away from her was unbearable. The inner tearing grew savage, remorse for dragging her near his dangerous world, terror that his enemies might one day target her to hurt him, and the burning, forbidden love that refused to be contained. Back in her apartment, now paid for through the foundation's salary, though still humble, Sarah lay awake beside sleeping Ethan. The new mattress was soft, the heat worked, but peace eluded her. Tony's brief touch lingered on her skin like a brand. She had spent years invisible, powerless, scraping by on pride and exhaustion. Now a man of immense wealth and power looked at her as if she were the only light in his dark world. The contrast dizzied her. Her thin arms against his strong ones, her empty cupboards against his penthouse abundance, her loneliness against the way his eyes promised everything. Fear battled longing. What did he want from her? Could a man like Tony Russo truly care for a broken waitress with nothing to offer but debts and a sick child? Yet when she remembered the gentleness in his voice, the way he listened as if her words were gold, something deep inside her ached with a hope she had long buried. Another unjust blow came the next day. At the diner, her last shift before leaving for the foundation full-time, a regular customer, emboldened by drink, refused to tip and complained loudly that his eggs were overcooked. The manager, eager to keep the man happy, docked Sarah's final paycheck again. She stood in the alley afterward, wind whipping her new coat, tears freezing on her lashes. The money did not matter anymore. She had the foundation salary waiting, but the humiliation did. Years of being treated as less than rushed back, making the new life feel fragile, like glass about to shatter. That evening, Tony appeared unannounced at the foundation office, finding her alone, eyes red. He did not ask what was wrong. He simply pulled her into a careful embrace, the first real one. Sarah stiffened, then melted against him, the solid warmth of his chest undoing her. For a long moment they stood in the quiet office, city lights glittering below, 2 hearts tearing in different directions, yet beating faster together. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," he murmured against her hair, voice rough with emotion. "Not ever." Sarah pulled back just enough to look up at him, eyes shining. The forbidden attraction crackled between them, intense, undeniable, terrifying in its power. Neither spoke the words yet, but both felt them. Love, impossible and growing, threatening to consume everything in its path. And outside, in the dark streets of Las Vegas, rivals watched and waited, sensing the storm about to break. The first week of November 2025 dawned crisp and unforgiving in Las Vegas. Sarah Jennings had begun to believe, cautiously, fearfully, that life might finally be kind. The foundation office was now her second home. She arrived early, stayed late, and every day brought another small victory. A new clinic opening, a mother crying grateful tears, a child breathing easier. Her salary had cleared every debt. Ethan's inhalers were always full. The apartment was warm for the first time in years. Yet the old hunger lingered in her bones, a ghost of thinness that made her clothes hang loosely, even on the new frame she was slowly rebuilding. Sleep still came in fits. Nightmares of eviction notices and empty fridges woke her gasping. Tony Russo visited almost daily now, always under the guise of business. Their late-night meetings had grown longer, the air between them thick with unspoken words. One evening, as they stood side by side reviewing blueprints for a new women's shelter, his hand brushed hers. Neither pulled away. The touch lingered, electric, dangerous. Sarah's heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. Tony's jaw clenched with the effort of restraint. Inside, his torment reached new heights. Love for her burned like wildfire, yet every day he saw the cost of his world creeping closer. Rivals watching, whispers of softness spreading through the streets. Then, without warning, the storm broke. It began with a phone call at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Sarah was dropping Ethan at school, kissing his forehead, promising to pick him up early for ice cream. Her cell rang, unknown number. She answered, expecting a donor or a staff member. "Miss Jennings, this is Special Agent Ramirez, FBI Las Vegas Field Office. We need you to come in immediately." The world tilted. Sarah's knees buckled. She gripped the chain-link fence outside the school to keep from falling. I don't understand. What's this about?" "Federal agents are on their way to your office. We have reason to believe you've been funneling foundation funds to organized crime, specifically to Anthony Russo." The line went dead. Sarah stood frozen in the school parking lot, wind whipping her coat, children streaming past her. Horror flooded her, cold, numbing, suffocating. She had never taken a dollar that wasn't hers. Every cent had gone to clinics, food banks, families. Yet the accusation landed like a physical blow. She thought of Ethan, of the new life she had dared to hope for, of Tony's quiet promise that no one would hurt her again. The unfairness was so vast it stole her breath. By the time she reached the foundation office, chaos reigned. Federal agents in Navy windbreakers swarmed the 20th floor, boxes already being filled with files and computers. Staff stood in stunned silence. Sarah's security badge was confiscated at the elevator. 2 agents flanked her, guiding her to the conference room where cameras waited, news crews already gathered outside the building, helicopters circling overhead. They read the charges in front of the cameras: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to aid organized crime. They showed evidence, bank transfers from the foundation to shell companies linked to Tony Russo, documents allegedly signed by Sarah herself. Her signature looked perfect. The dates matched her time at the foundation. She stared, numb, disoriented, as the world she had built crumbled in minutes. One agent, a woman with kind eyes, spoke softly. "Miss Jennings, we're taking you into custody. You have the right to remain silent." The words blurred. Sarah's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, head spinning, nausea rising. The agents helped her up gently, but the cameras caught every moment, her thin frame trembling, her face pale, tears streaming. Live on every local channel. Charity director accused of being mob boss's money launderer. They led her out in handcuffs. The walk through the lobby felt endless. Staff staring, some whispering, others crying. Outside, reporters surged forward, microphones thrust like weapons. "Miss Jennings, did you know Anthony Russo was using the foundation as a front? Are you in a relationship with the alleged crime boss?" Sarah kept her head down, voice barely a whisper. "I didn't do this. I swear I didn't." The drive to the federal building was a blur of flashing lights and shouted questions. In a small interrogation room, she sat alone, handcuffs cold against her wrists. The mirror across from her reflected a woman she hardly recognized, gaunt, terrified, utterly powerless. The contrast with the life she had glimpsed was unbearable. She had gone from sleeping in a freezing apartment to sitting in an office with a view of the mountains. Now she was back to nothing, worse than nothing, accused, humiliated, facing prison. Across the city, Tony Russo watched the news unfold in his penthouse. The screen showed Sarah being led out in handcuffs, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. His fist slammed into the marble countertop so hard the glass cracked. Pain shot through his knuckles, but it was nothing compared to the agony tearing through his chest. Remorse, violent, consuming, threatened to drown him. He had pulled her into his orbit, given her hope, let her believe she was safe. And now this. The framing was masterful. Forged documents, transfers that looked legitimate, all pointing to Sarah as the conduit. He knew immediately who had orchestrated it, his rivals from California, the same crew that had tailed him, taunted him. They had found the perfect way to destroy him, not by attacking him directly, but by destroying the one person he had dared to love. Tony stood motionless, watching the footage loop again and again. His love for her, already fierce, already impossible, now burned with a pain that felt physical. He had sworn to protect her, and instead, he had delivered her into the jaws of the system he had spent his life evading. The guilt was a living thing, clawing at his throat, his heart, his very soul. He made 2 calls. The first to his attorney, demanding immediate bail and every legal resource. The second to his most trusted men. Find out who did this, now. That afternoon, as Sarah sat in a holding cell, numb and shaking, Tony drove to a quiet street near the federal courthouse. 2 of his men waited in a black SUV. As he stepped out, the same California crew's vehicles appeared, 3 sedans blocking the intersection. Windows lowered, a man leaned out, grinning. "Looks like your little charity girl is in trouble, Russo. Shame about those bank records. Real shame." Tony's voice was low, deadly calm. "You went too far." The rival laughed. "Soft hearts bleed easy, remember? You should have stayed in your lane." Tension crackled across the empty street. Tony's men emerged, hands near concealed weapons. The rivals held their ground, engines idling. For long seconds, no one moved. Then Tony stepped forward, voice carrying, clear and cold. "This ends now. You touch her again, you touch me, and I will burn everything you have." The rivals' grin faltered. The standoff held, tense, silent, electric, until the California cars backed away, tires screeching. Tony stood alone in the street, wind whipping his coat, heart pounding with a fury he had not felt in years. Inside, the conflict raged harder than ever. Love for Sarah, guilt for endangering her, remorse for the life that had made this possible. He had never felt so powerless. Despite all his wealth, all his power, he could not shield her from this. In her cell, Sarah curled into a ball on the thin mattress, tears silent on her cheeks. The world had turned on her again, unfair, cruel, relentless. Yet in the darkest corner of her heart, one thought refused to die. Tony's face in the coffee shop, his gentle touch, his promise. Even now, accused and broken, she clung to the impossible hope that he would come for her. And in the city that never slept, the storm between them and around them grew darker still. The The holding cell in the federal building was cold and gray, the kind of cold that seeped into the bones no matter how tightly Sarah Jennings wrapped her arms around herself. November 2025 had barely begun, yet her world had already collapsed. She sat on the thin bench, knees drawn to her chest, thin frame shivering beneath the orange jumpsuit they had given her. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, merciless, illuminating every hollow in her face, the shadows under her eyes from years of broken sleep, the sharp line of her cheekbones from too many missed meals. Even now, with the foundation salary and warm apartment, the old poverty clung to her like a second skin. She felt small, powerless, the same girl who had once rationed cereal so Ethan could eat. Hours blurred. Agents came and went, asking the same questions in different ways. How long have you been working for Anthony Russo? Where are the missing funds? Sarah answered each time with a soft, timid whisper. I didn't do it. I never took anything. But the evidence, those perfect forgeries, painted her guilty. The unfairness was a knife twisting deeper with every breath. She had finally begun to hope, to believe she and Ethan might escape the cycle of desperation, and now this. Accused of betraying the one man who had ever seen her. Tony Russo fought every legal and illegal channel to reach her. His attorney secured a brief, supervised visit late that night, using connections built over decades. When the door opened and Tony stepped into the stark interrogation room, Sarah's breath caught. He looked different, tie loosened, suit jacket gone, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and something fiercer. 2 guards stood outside the open door, watching. Tony pulled out the chair across from her, sitting slowly as if afraid she might break. The table between them felt like a chasm. Sarah stared at her cuffed hands, shame burning her cheeks. She, who had once been invisible in her poverty, was now on every news channel, handcuffed, humiliated, labeled a criminal. Sarah, he said quietly, voice rough, look at me. She lifted her eyes. The intensity in his gaze stole what little breath she had left. Love, raw, burning, unmistakable, shone there, mixed with torment so deep it made her chest ache. I'm getting you out, he said. Bail hearing tomorrow. My people are already... It's not just bail, she whispered, voice trembling. They have evidence. My signature. Transfers. They think tears spilled over. I didn't, Tony. I swear on Ethan's life, I didn't. I know, he said fiercely. I know you didn't. Silence fell, heavy and aching. Outside the door, footsteps echoed, agents reminding them time was short. Tony leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said sooner. Sarah's heart pounded. Fear and curiosity mingled, dizzying her. What? He took a breath as if the words physically hurt. Vincent Moretti, he wasn't just my mentor. He was your father. The room spun. Sarah gripped the table edge, numbness shooting through her limbs. Vincent Moretti, the name her mother had spat in anger, the ghost who had abandoned them to poverty, cold nights, empty cupboards. The man whose absence had shaped every hardship of her life. No, she breathed, shaking her head. He didn't want me. My mother said, he was wrong, Tony cut in, voice cracking. He was a coward, and I swore to him I'd protect his blood. I didn't know you existed until that night in the rain. When Marco confirmed it, he stopped, jaw working. I've been trying to make it right ever since. The groceries, the rent, the job, all of it. Because you're family. Sarah stared, shock numbing her tongue. Family. The word felt foreign, impossible. All those quiet miracles, the food appearing, the bills vanishing, had come from him. From duty. From blood. A wave of dizziness crashed over her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears falling faster. Tony watched her unravel, and the second revelation tore from him before he could stop it. "But it's not just that anymore," he said, voice low and raw. "It stopped being just duty the moment I carried you and Ethan out of the rain. I've fought it every day since, told myself I had no right. You're Vincent's daughter. You're vulnerable. And he laughed bitterly, "I'm the last thing you need." Sarah's breath hitched. The air between them crackled. "I love you, Sarah," he said, the words falling like stones into still water. "Not as family, not as charity, as a man loves a woman, completely, irrevocably. And it's killing me that I brought this down on you." The confession struck her like lightning. Shock, confusion, horror, all collided, then melted into something hotter, deeper. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever looked at her as if she were the center of their universe. The contrast was dizzying, her life of thin soup and cold wind against his penthouse warmth and power. Yet here he was, the most powerful man she knew, voice breaking because of her. Sarah's hand lifted, trembling, reaching across the table. Tony met her halfway, fingers brushing despite the guard's watchful eyes. The touch was fire. "I slapped men for less," she whispered, tears streaming, a broken laugh escaping. "But you pulled us out of the rain. You gave Ethan breath. You gave me hope." Her voice cracked. "I don't understand any of this, Tony. But when you look at me, I don't feel invisible anymore." He gripped her hand tighter, careful of the cuffs. Inside, his heart tore in violent directions. Joy at her words, terror that his love would destroy her, remorse that his enemies had used her to strike at him. The blood tie had started it all. The love had made her a target. Outside in the corridor, another confrontation brewed. Tony's attorney argued with agents for more time, while two of Tony's men waited in the lobby. As Tony finally stood to leave, promising to return for the bail hearing, a group of California Rivals associates lingered across the street, watching the building. When Tony emerged, they followed at a distance, pulling alongside his Escalade at a red light near Charleston Boulevard. Windows cracked. A voice shouted, "How's your girl doing in lockup, Russo? Bet she's singing by now." Tony's driver slowed. His men pulled up behind. The standoff was brief but electric. Engines growling, stairs locked, hands visible but tense. No words from Tony, just a cold glare that promised retribution. The Rivals backed off first, tires screeching into the night. Back in the cell, Sarah lay on the thin mattress, hands still tingling from his touch. The revelations spun in her mind. Daughter of a man who never wanted her, loved by a man who would burn the world to keep her safe. The forbidden line had been crossed. Love, passionate, impossible, overwhelming, bloomed fierce and sudden in the ruins of her captivity. And in his penthouse that night, Tony stood at the window, city lights blurring through unshed tears. The woman he loved more than life was behind bars because of him. The revelation had freed his heart and chained it tighter than ever. Whatever came next, bail, trials, war, he would fight for her, even if it cost him everything. The storm between them had only begun. Bail was granted the next morning in November 2025, a technicality Tony Russo's attorneys exploited with ruthless precision. Sarah Jennings walked out of the federal building into blinding flashbulbs and shouted questions, her legs unsteady, dizziness sweeping through her again as the cold wind hit her face. She wore the same clothes from the day of her arrest, now wrinkled, smelling of the holding cell. Tony waited at the bottom of the steps, flanked by his attorney and two silent men in dark suits. When Sarah saw him, something inside her broke open. She stumbled down the last few stairs. He caught her before she fell, arms wrapping around her thin frame with a gentleness that belied his strength. For a long moment, they stood like that on the courthouse steps, cameras clicking furiously, the world watching. Sarah buried her face against his chest, breathing in the faint scent of his cologne, tears soaking his shirt. Tony held her as if she were the only real thing in his life, his own heart pounding with a mixture of relief and fury. The love he had confessed in the interrogation room now burned brighter, more desperate, yet the remorse was a living wound. She was free on paper, but the charges hung over her like a storm cloud, and he knew exactly who had engineered it all. In the back of the Escalade, shielded by tinted windows, Sarah finally spoke, voice soft and trembling. "They're saying I could still go to prison. Years, Tony. Ethan..." She couldn't finish. The unfairness choked her. She, who had known nothing but struggle, cold apartments, empty cupboards, nights awake listening to her son wheeze, now faced losing everything because of forged papers. Tony's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "You won't," he said, voice low with promise. "I swear on my life, Sarah, you won't." Inside, the conflict tore at him more violently than ever. He had confessed his love, she had not pulled away. Yet every protective instinct screamed that he should send her far away, some quiet place with Ethan, money enough to live comfortably, safe from the war he now had to wage. But the thought of losing her, even to protect her, was unbearable. The love was no longer a flame, it was an inferno, consuming reason. Over the next 48 hours, Tony's men worked in shadows. Digital trails were traced, hushed conversations recorded, loyalties tested. The picture emerged clear and ugly. The California crew, emboldened by Tony's soft, charitable turn, had bribed a low-level foundation accountant to plant the forged documents. Their goal was simple: discredit the foundation, paint Sarah as a traitor, and force Tony into a corner where he would either abandon his legitimate efforts or face federal heat. But the true architect was closer to home. Marco, Tony's consigliere, brought the final piece late one night in the penthouse study. "It's Vinny Caruso," he said quietly, "your underboss. He's been talking to the Californians behind your back, wants your seat. Figured framing the girl would break you, make you look weak, distracted." Tony stood motionless at the window, city lights glittering coldly below. Vinny, his own cousin by marriage, a man he had raised in the life, trusted with territory. The betrayal cut deeper than any rival knife. Remorse flooded him again, for building an empire on blood and loyalty that could turn so easily, for dragging Sarah into its reach. He made the decision without hesitation. Bring him in, quietly. Sarah, released on strict conditions, no contact with Foundation staff, ankle monitor, surrender of passport, stayed in Tony's guest wing, a world of marble floors and soft lighting so far removed from her old apartment that dizziness struck her every time she walked its halls. Ethan was with a trusted nanny in another suite, safe and bewildered by the sudden luxury. Sarah wandered the rooms at night, touching silk curtains, staring at her reflection in gilded mirrors, still thin, still haunted. The poverty of her past felt like a brand. The wealth around her felt borrowed, temporary. She feared the moment it would all be snatched away again. One afternoon, Tony found her in the library, curled in an armchair overlooking the Strip. She looked up, eyes red from crying. "I keep thinking about the mothers at the clinic," she whispered. "They trusted me. Now they'll think I stole from them." Tony knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "They'll know the truth soon." His voice was steady, but inside the storm raged. Seeing her pain he had caused by loving her, was torture. Yet the need to hold her, to promise her forever, grew more overwhelming with every tear. Their second kiss happened there, sudden and fierce. Sarah reached for him first, fingers tangling in his shirt, pulling him close as if he were the only solid thing left. Tony responded with a hunger held back too long, arms crushing her to him, mouth claiming hers with desperate passion. The world narrowed to heat and breath and heartbeat. When they broke apart, both trembling, Tony rested his forehead against hers. "I'll fix this," he whispered, "whatever it takes." The reckoning came 2 nights later. Vinnie Caruso was brought to an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, a neutral site used for sit-downs. Tony waited alone at a scarred wooden table, city lights distant through grimy windows. When Vinnie entered, flanked by 2 of Tony's most trusted men, his swagger faltered at the emptiness of the room. "Boss," Vinnie said, forcing a smile. "What's this about?" Tony did not rise. "You framed Sarah." Vinnie's face paled, but he blustered. "I don't know what—" "Save it." Tony slid a folder across the table. Bank records, phone logs, a recorded conversation with the Californians. "You sold me out to outsiders. For what? My chair?" Vinnie's bravado cracked. "You've gone soft, Tony. All this charity crap. The men are laughing. The Californians offered a better deal." Tony stood slowly. The room seemed to shrink around his presence. "You touched the one person who matters more than this life. You used her past, her poverty, her struggles, to break her." His voice dropped, deadly quiet. "You broke an innocent woman to get to me." Vinnie backed up a step. "She's just some waitress, you—" Tony moved faster than anyone expected, grabbing Vinnie by the collar, slamming him against the wall. Not a blow, just raw power holding him immobile. "She's everything," Tony growled, "and you will never speak her name again." The sentence was delivered according to old rules: demotion, exile, loss of all territory and protection. Vinnie was escorted out alive, but stripped of everything. Family ties severed, name erased. The message rippled through the streets: cross Tony Russo's woman and mercy ends. Outside the warehouse, the California crew waited in shadows, hoping for chaos. When Vinnie emerged broken, they realized the miscalculation. One of their cars tried a final taunt, pulling alongside Tony's Escalade on the drive back, shouting threats. Tony's driver slowed, his men flanked. Another silent standoff under streetlights, engines humming, eyes locked, until the Californians retreated, sensing the shift in power. Back in the penthouse, Tony found Sarah waiting in the living room, wrapped in one of his robes that swallowed her thin frame. She had heard nothing of the night's events, yet she sensed the weight on him. Without a word, she walked into his arms. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, the scent of her calming the storm inside. "It's over," he murmured. "The evidence will disappear. Charge drops soon." Sarah pulled back, searching his face. How? He couldn't tell her the full truth, not yet. Instead, he kissed her again, slower this time, pouring every ounce of the love that had torn him apart into the touch. She responded with equal passion, fingers threading through his hair, body pressing close as if to erase the distance their worlds had always imposed. In that quiet moment, amid the glittering wealth of his home and the lingering shadows of her poverty, they clung to each other. The counterattack complete, the reckoning paid, and the forbidden love burning brighter than any danger left in the dark. The charges against Sarah Jennings were formally dropped on a gray morning in mid-November 2025. The forged documents mysteriously vanished from federal servers, replaced by audit trails pointing to an outside breach. The accountant who had planted them recanted under pressure, claiming coercion by unknown parties. The case collapsed quietly, headlines shifting to "Mistaken Identity" and "FBI Apologizes." Sarah walked free, no record, no stain. But the damage lingered deep. She returned to Tony Russo's penthouse because her old apartment felt like a cage of memories. Cold nights, empty cupboards, the constant hum of fear. Ethan thrived in the new space. Wide hallways to run, a bedroom with toys he had only seen in store windows. But Sarah moved through the marble and glass like a ghost. The wealth was overwhelming. Fresh flowers delivered daily, a kitchen always stocked, clothes that fit perfectly. Yet every luxury reminded her of the pit she had crawled from. The thinness still in her wrists, the instinctive flinch when a bill arrived, the nights she woke gasping from dreams of eviction. Tony watched her with eyes that never rested. The love he had confessed burned hotter now, tempered by a remorse that gnawed without cease. Vinnie Caruso's exile had sent a message, but rivals, especially the California crew, saw blood in the water. They believed Tony's attachment to Sarah made him vulnerable. Drive-by taunts escalated, cars circling the tower at night, anonymous calls to his private line, packages left at Foundation sites with veiled threats. One evening, as Tony escorted Sarah and Ethan home from a quiet dinner at a small Italian place off the Strip, trouble struck hard. A black sedan cut them off near Paradise Road, forcing the Escalade to brake sharply. Windows lowered, shouts rang out. "Time to choose, Russo, the girl or your empire." Tony's men responded instantly, vehicles boxing the sedan in. Engines revved, headlights glared across the intersection. No shots, just raw menace hanging in the air like smoke. Sarah clutched Ethan in the back seat, heart pounding, dizziness returning as old fears surged. The standoff ended when police sirens wailed in the distance. The sedan peeled away, but the warning had landed. That night, in the penthouse living room overlooking the glittering city, Sarah stood at the window, arms wrapped around her thin frame. Tony approached slowly, stopping behind her. He did not touch her yet. The space between them crackled. "They won't stop," she said quietly, voice soft but steady. "Because of me." Tony's reflection in the glass looked tormented. "They'll stop when they understand the cost." Sarah turned. Tears shone in her eyes, but her chin lifted. "I'm not worth a war, Tony. I'm just me, a waitress who couldn't keep the heat on. You have everything, power, family, a life I can't even imagine. Let me go. Take Ethan and me somewhere quiet. You can visit. We'll be safe. You'll be safe." The words struck him like blows. Tony stepped closer, hands rising to cup her face gently, thumbs brushing away tears. Inside, his heart tore with violent force, the need to protect her warring with the terror of losing her. Love, passionate, all-consuming, roared against reason. "You think I could live without you?" he asked, voice rough. "Sarah, you are my everything, the only light I've had in years. I built walls of money and power, and you walked through them in the rain with your son in your arms. I can't let you go. I won't." She searched his face, confusion and longing colliding. "But your world, it's dangerous. I've been poor my whole life. I know how to survive nothing, but I don't know how to survive this." Tony pulled her close, arms wrapping around her as if to shield her from every cruelty past and future. She melted against him, thin body trembling. Their kiss began slow, tender, almost reverent, then ignited, fierce and desperate. Hands tangled, breaths mingled, the city lights forgotten. When they broke apart, foreheads touching, both were shaking. "I have a dangerous idea," Sarah whispered, voice barely audible. The words surprised even her. They rose from a place of fierce protectiveness she had never known she possessed. Tony waited, blue eyes searching hers. "Marry me," she said, "publicly. Make it impossible for them to touch me without touching you completely. If we're one family, one name, attacking me is attacking you directly. They'll have to back down or declare total war, and they won't risk that." Shock rippled through him. Tony pulled back slightly, staring. The suggestion was bold, shocking, exactly the kind of move that turned weakness into unbreakable strength in his world. Yet it came from her, the woman who had known only powerlessness, now choosing to stand at his side in the fire. "Sarah," his voice cracked, "you don't know what you're asking. Marrying me means no turning back. My enemies become yours. My life—" "I know," she interrupted softly, fingers tracing his jaw. "But I've been alone my whole life. Cold apartments, empty tables, nights wondering if Ethan would breathe until morning. You gave me hope. You gave me love. I'm not running anymore. If we burn together. Tony's heart tore open completely. Remorse for the danger he had brought her, joy at her courage, love so intense it hurt, all collided. He dropped to one knee right there on the marble floor, taking her hands in his. "Then marry me," he said, voice thick. "Not because of threats, because I can't breathe without you. Because every day since that rain, you've been my reason." Sarah's tears fell faster. She nodded, unable to speak. He rose, pulling her into another kiss, deeper, possessive, sealing the dangerous choice. The next morning, Tony made calls. The wedding would be public, lavish, impossible to ignore. Invitations went to every major player, rivals included. The message? Sarah Jennings would become Sarah Russo. Touch her and face the full weight of the family. Outside, the California crew tested once more. As Tony drove to a meeting, 3 vehicles boxed him in near Sahara Avenue. Windows down, shouts. "Heard you're getting married, Russo. Cute. Hope the bride likes fireworks." Tony's response was calm ice. His men pulled alongside. The standoff stretched long minutes under the desert sun, engines idling, stairs locked. Then Tony's voice carried across the asphalt. "Tell your bosses the invitation's in the mail. Come celebrate. Or stay home and think about consequences." The cars scattered. In the penthouse, Sarah stood before a full-length mirror, trying on a simple white dress the stylist had brought. Her reflection looked different, still thin, but shoulders straighter, eyes brighter. The poverty that had shaped her, cold wind through cracked windows, the humiliation of food bank lines, was fading. Yet it had forged the strength now guiding her choice. She placed a hand over her heart, feeling it race. Marrying Tony Russo meant stepping fully into his world. Danger, power, wealth beyond imagining. Yet the alternative, losing him, returning to shadows, was unthinkable. Tony found her there, wrapping arms around her from behind, chin resting on her shoulder. Their eyes met in the mirror. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly, the last remnant of doubt. Sarah turned in his arms, rising on toes to kiss him softly. "I've never been more sure of anything." The dangerous choice was made. In uniting their fates so publicly, they turned vulnerability into armor. But both knew the wedding would be more than vows. It would be a declaration of war or peace. And in the quiet before the storm, they held each other, love burning fierce and bright against whatever darkness waited. The wedding was set for the last Saturday in November 2025 in the Cathedral Basilica of Saints Peter and Paul, a deliberate choice of grandeur and tradition that echoed through every corner of Las Vegas. Invitations went out on heavy cream stock, embossed in gold. Anthony Russo and Sarah Jennings request the honor of your presence. Rivals received theirs personally delivered, a message impossible to ignore. The city buzzed with speculation. Some called it madness, others a masterstroke. Tony and Sarah called it survival. Preparations consumed the days. Sarah, still adjusting to the penthouse's endless luxury, silk sheets that no longer felt cold, a refrigerator always full, found herself swept into fittings, menus, guest lists. Yet, beneath the excitement, fear lingered. She caught her reflection often, still thin, eyes still carrying shadows of old hunger, hands that trembled when she thought too long about the past. The poverty that had defined her, nights huddled under thin blankets while wind howled through cracks, days choosing between bus fare and food, felt like a ghost watching from the corners of these opulent rooms. Tony watched her closer than ever. The love that had ignited in captivity now burned with a desperation born of impending war. Every smile she gave him eased the torment, yet every shadow in her eyes deepened it. He had promised protection, but the California crew's response to the invitations was swift and ugly. Cars circled the cathedral during rehearsals, slow and deliberate. Anonymous calls came to the foundation. Pretty dress for a funeral. One night, as Tony's men escorted Sarah home from a final fitting, 2 sedans boxed them in on Las Vegas Boulevard. Windows down, shouts rang out. "Cancel the wedding, Russo, or the bride won't make it to the altar." Tony's driver braked hard. His men pulled alongside, forming a wall of steel. The standoff stretched long minutes under the neon glow, engines growling, headlights blinding, tension thick as smoke. Sarah sat frozen in the back, Ethan safely at home with guards, her heart pounding with old terror. Tony's voice cut through the chaos, calm and cold. "Tell your bosses the invitation stands. Come in peace or don't come at all." The sedans backed off first, tires screeching into traffic, but the threats escalated. 2 nights before the wedding, a package arrived at the cathedral. A white bridal veil splattered with red paint and a note, "Blood looks good on white." Sarah found it first during a quiet visit to see the flower arrangements. She stood alone in the empty nave, package in trembling hands, dizziness crashing over her so fiercely she sank to the marble floor. Tears came silent and hot. The unfairness was monstrous. She had finally found love, safety, a future, and now violence circled because of it. The ghost of her poverty whispered again. She was still the powerless girl who didn't belong in this world of power and danger. Tony arrived minutes later, alerted by security. When he saw her on the floor, veil clutched in white-knuckled hands, something inside him shattered. He knelt, gathering her into his arms, holding her as she shook. Remorse flooded him, violent, choking. He had promised no one would hurt her again, yet his enemies used her past fragility as a weapon. "I can call it off," he whispered against her hair, voice breaking for the first time. "We'll disappear, somewhere quiet, just us and Ethan." Sarah pulled back, eyes fierce through tears. "No." Her voice, usually soft and timid, rang clear in the vast cathedral. "They don't get to take this from us, from me. I've lost everything else in my life. Warmth, security, hope. I won't lose you." The defiance in her words ignited them both. Tony cupped her face, kissing her with a passion that bordered on desperation, deep, claiming, pouring every ounce of love into the touch. When they broke apart, breathless, the decision crystallized. The wedding would go forward, more public, more defiant. They moved the ceremony to prime time, live-streamed on local news. Security tripled, Tony's men in tuxedos lining pews, plainclothes officers mixing with guests. Rivals were invited openly. Their absence would be seen as weakness, their presence as acceptance. The cathedral filled with flowers, white roses everywhere, symbol of purity against threat. The day arrived crisp and bright. Sarah stood in the bridal suite, gown simple yet elegant, ivory silk that skimmed her still slender frame, veil flowing like forgiveness. Ethan, in a tiny tuxedo, held her hand, eyes wide with pride. When the organ began, Sarah walked the aisle alone, no father to give her away, but head high. Every step echoed her journey, from cold apartments and empty tables to this moment of chosen strength. Tony waited at the altar, impeccable in black tuxedo, eyes locked on her. When she reached him, his hand trembled, taking hers, a crack in the armor no one else saw. Vows were traditional yet personal, to protect, to cherish, in danger and in peace. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Tony kissed her, not the polite peck expected, but deep and possessive, arms crushing her close. The congregation erupted, cameras flashed, the live feed captured it all. Outside, as they emerged into sunlight for photos, the final confrontation came. 3 sedans pulled up across the street, California plates, windows tinted. Doors opened, Men stepped out in suits, hands visible but postures threatening. The crowd hushed. Tony's men formed a silent line along the cathedral steps. Police nearby tensed. The lead rival, a man Tony knew well, smiled thinly. "Congratulations, Russo. Bold move." Tony stood with arm around Sarah's waist, her body pressed to his side. "You were invited," he said calmly. "You chose not to come inside." Message received. The rival's gaze shifted to Sarah. "Hope the bride knows what she signed up for." Sarah, heart pounding but voice steady, spoke for the first time publicly. "I do." The standoff held, sun glinting off car metal, guests frozen, cameras rolling. Minutes stretched. Then the rival nodded once, almost respectful, and retreated to his car. Tires rolled away without further word. The message had landed both ways. The marriage was unbreakable. Attack one, attack both. The Californians backed down, war averted by sheer defiant unity. That night, in the penthouse transformed for a small reception, Tony and Sarah danced alone on the terrace overlooking the city. Her gown flowed around them. His arms held her as if she might vanish. The love between them, born in rain, forged in fire, was now fierce and unapologetic. "I was so afraid," Sarah whispered against his chest. "But standing there with you, I've never felt stronger." Tony kissed her temple, voice thick. "You saved me, Sarah, from the man I was becoming." Below, Las Vegas glittered, indifferent, eternal. Above, they held each other in the quiet after the storm, passion burning bright against the night. The war had been won not with violence, but with defiant love made public. And in choosing each other so boldly, they had turned danger into legacy. Peace settled over Las Vegas like a soft blanket in the months following the wedding, a peace hard-won and fragile. December 2025 arrived with cooler nights and the distant glow of holiday lights along the Strip. But Tony and Sarah Russo lived in a world apart, high above the city in the penthouse that had become their sanctuary. The public defiance of their marriage had worked. Rivals backed away, whispers of war faded, and the California crew sent a discreet gift, a case of fine wine, with a note of congratulations. Tony delegated more day-to-day operations to trusted lieutenants, stepping back from the shadows that had defined him for decades. Sarah blossomed in ways that stole Tony's breath daily. The thinness that had once spoken of skipped meals and cold nights slowly filled out. Color returned to her cheeks, sleep came deeper in the soft king bed they now shared. Yet the past lingered in quiet moments, when she paused before opening the always full refrigerator, or when her hand instinctively checked the heat vents as if expecting them to fail. The poverty of her former life, thin blankets against biting wind, the humiliation of counting coins for milk, had carved deep grooves in her soul. Some nights she woke gasping, reaching for Ethan across the vast bedroom, afraid it had all been a dream. Tony watched these moments with a heart that tore anew each time. His love for her, born fierce in rain, tempered in fire, sealed in vows, grew only deeper, more reverent. Yet remorse shadowed every joy. He had given her luxury beyond imagining, private chefs, designer clothes, a foundation that now bore both their names. But he could not erase the years she had suffered alone. The wealth he showered on her felt sometimes like salt in old wounds. The private jet for a weekend getaway, contrasting the buses she once rode in freezing rain. The diamond necklace for Christmas, contrasting the pawned jewelry of her past. They poured themselves into the expanded Moretti Russo Foundation. 10 new community centers rose across the Southwest, pediatric clinics specializing in asthma care, food pantries that never turned anyone away, after-school programs where children like Ethan once was could learn and play without fear. Sarah led with a passion born of lived experience, every decision rooted in memory of cold nights and empty tables. Tony funded it all without hesitation, quietly redirecting resources from older, darker enterprises. One quiet evening in early December, they stood on the terrace, watching the city sparkle below. Sarah leaned against the railing, a warm shawl around her shoulders. Cashmere, a gift from Tony. Ethan slept inside, exhausted from a day at his new private school. Snow flurries, rare for Las Vegas, drifted lazily in the air. "I keep waiting to wake up," Sarah said softly, voice carrying the old timid note when emotion ran deep. "Every morning I open my eyes and expect the cracked ceiling, the draft from the window. Instead, there's this." She gestured to the penthouse lights behind them, the endless view. Tony came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder. "It's real," he murmured. "You deserve every bit of it." She turned in his arms, eyes searching his. "Do I? After everything the life you lived to build this?" The question struck deep. Tony's heart tore with familiar violence, love for her warring with remorse for the man he had been. "You redeem me, Sarah," he said, voice rough. "Every day. You and Ethan, you're the reason I'm becoming someone I can look at in the mirror." Their kiss began gentle, then deepened, passionate, intense, the kind that still surprised them with its power. Hands tangled, bodies pressed close against the cold railing. When they pulled apart, breathless, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "I want to give back more," she whispered. "Not just with your money, with mine, with us." Tony nodded, understanding. Together, they began shifting foundation leadership, Sarah as co-chair, her name on every building plaque beside his. They opened asthma clinics named after children who had suffered as Ethan once did, scholarships for single mothers returning to school, job training for those released from difficult pasts. Old tensions occasionally flared. One afternoon, driving to a groundbreaking in North Las Vegas, their convoy was tailed by a lone sedan, remnant of a smaller rival faction testing boundaries. At a stoplight near Craig Road, the car pulled alongside. Window down, a shouted taunt. "Nice family man act, Russo. How long till it cracks?" Tony's hand tightened on Sarah's. His men moved instantly, vehicles flanking, a silent wall forming. The standoff lasted minutes, engines idling, stairs locked across sun-baked asphalt. Sarah's heart raced, old fear rising, but she squeezed Tony's hand back. The rival backed off first, tires spinning away. Later, at the groundbreaking, Sarah spoke to the gathered crowd, mothers, children, community leaders. Her voice, once timid, now carried clear and strong. "I know what it's like to wonder if tomorrow will have heat or food or medicine for your child. This center is for every one of us who ever felt invisible." Tony stood beside her, pride and love shining in his eyes. The remorse still gnawed. He could never fully erase her past suffering, but redemption grew in these moments. He was learning to lead with openness rather than fear, to build rather than take. That Christmas, they hosted a small gathering in the penthouse, Ethan's first, with a towering tree and gifts piled high. Sarah watched her son laugh as he opened a bicycle, tears in her eyes. Later, when Ethan slept, she and Tony sat by the fire. "I used to dream of a Christmas like this," she said quietly, "but I stopped believing it could happen." Tony pulled her close. "Believe now." Their lovemaking that night was slow and reverent, passion tempered by gratitude. In the quiet afterward, bodies entwined, Sarah traced the lines of his face. "You gave me back my life," she whispered. "You gave me mine," he answered. Outside, occasional shadows lingered, old rivals watching from distance, testing. But the confrontations grew rarer, resolved with phone calls rather than streets. Tony's reputation had shifted. The man who married for love, who built clinics instead of fear, was harder to challenge. Sarah's past poverty became her greatest strength. Every decision at the foundation bore its mark. No child turned away for lack of insurance. No mother judged for needing help. The disparity that once humiliated her now fueled her mission, to ensure no one else endured what she had. Tony delegated more, spending evenings teaching Ethan chess, mornings walking with Sarah through new centers. The inner torment eased, not gone, but transformed. Love had redeemed him, step by step. In quiet moments, Sarah still felt dizziness at the contrast, her old life of cold wind and empty tables against this warmth and plenty. But she no longer feared waking from the dream. Tony's arms around her each night were proof it was real. And in building legacy together, centers rising, children breathing easier, families finding hope, they found redemption. The rain that had brought them together now felt like baptism, washing away old pain, leaving only love and purpose in its wake. The past shadows lingered, but light grew stronger every day. 5 years slipped by in a rhythm of quiet triumphs and deepening love. It was now the spring of 2030, and the Anthony Russo Foundation had grown beyond anything Tony or Sarah could have imagined in those first desperate days. 20 new community centers dotted cities across the country, places where children received free medical care, where single mothers found job training, where families once cold and hungry now gathered in warmth and plenty. The asthma clinics bearing Ethan's name had saved countless young lives. Sarah, once thin and hollow-eyed from years of deprivation, now carried a gentle fullness, not just in body, but in spirit. The old ghosts of poverty still visited in dreams, but they no longer ruled her waking hours. Tony had changed too. The man who once commanded fear now commanded respect through generosity. He had stepped almost entirely away from the old shadows, delegating what remained to men who understood the new direction. His wealth, once a fortress, now flowed outward like a river, funding scholarships, rebuilding neighborhoods, lifting those who had known the same cold wind Sarah once endured. Yet remorse lingered in quiet moments. The knowledge that his past had delayed her rescue, that she had suffered needlessly while he built empires. Love for her burned brighter with every year, a fierce and tender flame that both healed and humbled him. The pinnacle came on a bright May morning at the dedication of the Vincent Russo National Children's Health Campus in Las Vegas, a sprawling complex of clinics, therapy centers, and family support wings. Thousands gathered, families helped by the foundation, donors, press, children waving handmade signs. Ethan, now 11 and strong, stood tall between his parents, no trace left of the wheezing boy from that rainy night. Sarah took the stage first, visibly pregnant with twins, a surprise that had filled their home with new joy. Her gown flowed softly, her face radiant despite the emotion thickening her voice. She spoke of her past without shame. The cracked apartments, the nights choosing between heat and food, the terror of watching her son struggle to breathe. "I know what it is to feel invisible," she said, voice steady yet soft. "To believe no one sees your pain." But knowledge of that suffering became my strength. It taught me the lesson that compassion is the greatest power we have. Education about another's struggle opens the heart. Knowledge of poverty breeds empathy. The lesson is simple. One act of kindness can change everything. Education in love, not judgment, builds the future. Tony joined her, hand resting protectively on her back. His voice, once used for commands, now carried only gratitude. "I spent years believing power came from fear," he said. "But my wife taught me the true lesson. Power comes from lifting others." Knowledge of her courage changed me. Admonition through her love redeemed me. The lesson is clear. Wealth means nothing without heart. Knowledge of shared humanity unites us. Education in generosity multiplies joy. Then Sarah stepped forward again, eyes shining with the final revelation. "Today we announce the Silent Guardian Fund," she said. "Fully endowed scholarships for college, open to children of families who have faced hardship of any kind, including those whose parents once walked difficult paths and are now seeking better lives. No judgment, only opportunity." The crowd erupted. Tony turned to her, eyes wet for the first time in public. The fund would quietly include children of former associates, those once in his world, now rebuilding. Sarah had extended mercy where others would have withheld it, proving love transcended old divisions, wealth or poverty, past mistakes or present grace. In that moment, Tony pulled her close and kissed her, deep, passionate, unconcerned with cameras or crowd. The embrace lasted long enough to make headlines again. Love that changed a city. Ethan grinned beside them, announcing loudly, "That's how you know it's real love." The gathering ended with laughter, tears, and music. Families who had once stood in foundation lines now stood as honored guests. Children ran through new gardens. Sarah and Tony walked the grounds hand in hand, Ethan racing ahead. Later, in the quiet of the dedication garden, Tony knelt before Sarah, much as he had the night he proposed, and placed his hand on her belly. "You gave me redemption," he whispered. "You taught me the greatest lesson. Love crosses every line, wealth, poverty, past, future. Knowledge of your heart healed mine." Sarah cupped his face, tears falling. "And you taught me I was worth saving. The lesson is that no one is invisible. Education and kindness changes the world." Their kiss in the garden was soft, enduring, a promise kept against every odd. Love, they had learned, knew no boundary of skin or status. Wealth and poverty could not separate true compassion. One act in the rain had rippled outward, touching thousands, proving that knowledge of another's pain births empathy, that the lesson of generosity multiplies, that education in love redeems even the hardest hearts. Knowledge transforms, the lesson endures, education heals, knowledge opens doors, the lesson is eternal, education in humanity unites us forever. To everyone watching this story on Alex Truths, may good health fill your days, may joy light your path, and may daily peace settle in your heart. If this story touched you, please subscribe to the channel Alex Truths, like this video, and share it with someone who needs hope today. We upload engaging stories every single day. Tell me in the comments, how did this story make you feel? Have you ever seen love overcome impossible differences in real life? Share your heart. I read every comment and treasure the emotions you trust me with. See you in the next video. Goodbye for now. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.